So Susan is the author of The Wealth of Your Life, a step-by-step guide for creating your ethical will, co-author of Across Generations, a 5-step guide for creating an expression of donor intent, and creator of the Life Legacy cards, all designed for those who agree that wealth transferred to future generations has both tangible and intangible dimensions. Susan's work has been featured in many national publications, and I actually have seen her many times throughout my years, including the New York Times and USA Today. She and her husband have 3 grown children and recently welcomed the birth of their 7th grandchild. They live in Manchester, Massachusetts, which is nice to have a local business owner with us today. So it's my pleasure to welcome Susan.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Robin, and it's really nice to be here with all of you today. This presentation is going to be a combination of watching slides, some video looking at me as I'm talking directly to you, and then some exercises. So I think you should have received some handouts from Robin. And if you have those and you've printed them out, please have them with you with a pen or a pencil. If you didn't get them, don't worry about it. I'll be giving you some instructions during the program, so don't panic if you don't have them. So let's get right into this topic of what is a legacy letter anyway. And I'm going to start off here with just sharing my screen. Let's just dive right into this. So what is one of these anyway? And I'm going to be using the term legacy letter and ethical will interchangeably today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history and the derivation of ethical will, so you understand where that kind of funny sounding term actually comes from. But I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. They're the same thing. But essentially, a legacy letter is a personal letter, something really simple. That's the opportunity to set down evidence of what's important to you. And what makes it different than other kinds of letters is that it's intended to live beyond you. Even if you share it during life, which is for many people a wonderful thing to do, even if you share it during life or you change it or adapt it during life, in the end, it becomes part of the record of your life. And but at the end, when you boil it down, legacy letters are letters of love. And I'm going to be giving you some excerpts, several excerpts from ethical wills written over the years. And I think you'll get a sense of just why that's ultimately what they are. And because the person, you or whoever has written them, has really taken the time to set down their thoughts and their emotions, their feelings in an enduring format. And that's a very, very beautiful thing to receive and to do and to create. And ultimately, a legacy letter is an instrument of legacy. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of ethical wills, I want to talk about this thing called legacy. You know, what is it? It's a kind of, I think, a vague word, and I think more than vaguely intimidating. I mean, if you think about someone that's left a legacy, chances are you think, well, that person's probably dead, first of all, right? Because we tend to define someone's legacy when they're no longer here. And it's oftentimes associated with money or with people who are famous in some way, exceptional in some way. And I don't really like that definition of legacy because it seems to apply in the future when I'm no longer here, and it belongs to somebody else. And I'd like to bring legacy down to earth and have you think about it today like this, that your legacy is your influence, is the difference that you make in the lives of other people, whether you know those people or not. And the difference you make in the lives of other people during your life and afterwards. And so when you think about legacy as influence, so let's just think about, well, how are you influential? Well, I sort of see it in 3 different ways. You're basically influential with who you are, you know, your character, what you stand for, your values, how you make people feel. It's a legacy of your character. And then there's the influence, the legacy of what you do every day, you know, the actions that you take, the decisions that you make, the problems that you solve, how you spend your money, how you give your money away. All those actions have an influence that ripples out. And then there's the influence of what you communicate. what you speak, what you say, what you write, what you tweet. We know that words can be really, really powerful. And another thing that and so legacy is something, and influence is something that happens every day, oftentimes in ways that you don't know. How many times has someone said to you, I'll never forget the time you did this, or you told me this, and you can't remember what they're talking about. We are influencing people in mysterious ways all the time, and we're never quite sure what that influence is. So it's a mystery, and it's something that a lot of times you're not conscious of it. You're not thinking every day, well, what kind of a legacy am I creating? Except that there are times in your life when you do think about it. And that's kind of dependent upon your age, your circumstances, your experiences. And I think that the era of COVID now has kind of brought this, we're all kind of thinking in deeper, different ways about what do we really value, what is important to us, how do we want to be remembered? I think that's really come to the fore recently. So another thing that I think is really interesting about legacy is to think about it in the dimensions of time, that you are both a carrier of legacy, of the legacy of other people, as well as the creator of legacy. And I want to have some fun with this idea. And I want to bring up, this is an exercise, the first exercise that we're going to do today. And that is that the first handout, one of the handouts that you got looks like this. So if you could pull this out, if you don't have it, just get a piece of paper, draw a circle in the middle, and then a line across the middle. And this is sort of this is your life chart in a very simple way. What I want you to do is put your initials in the middle, in the circle. And then the top half above the line in the middle is really, and if you think about the middle line as the present moment, and of course the present is only a moment, and to think about the space above the line as everything and everyone that's had an influence upon you from the present going up to the past, and when it can go way, way back into the past. And underneath the line is the opportunity for you to think about in whose lives would you like to be an influence from the present moment going way into the future. And so the first thing I want you to do with this now is to put your name in the middle of the circle. And we're just going to take a minute to do this. So put your name in the middle, and then take a minute or two to put on the line above the name or names, one to two, three people, no more than that, of a person or a couple of people who have been important to you, whose influence you feel like you're carrying. So someone you admire, someone perhaps whose values you're carrying. Someone that loved you. This could be a parent or a grandparent. It could be a teacher or a colleague, a friend. It could even be a public figure who demonstrated something to you. I also want to make the point that sometimes the most powerful influences upon us are the people whose examples we've decided not to follow. We say, well, that's not the life that I want, or that's not the habits that I want to pick up. So let's just take a minute now for you to put down a name or two above the line. Once you have the name, then see if you can find an adjective that you would attach to that person, an adjective or a value. So I'm just going to give you a minute to do that exercise. Okay, that minute is up. I hope that was brought the idea of influence into your own life, and the idea of legacy. I hope it made you think about legacy and influence in a new way, in a way that's really personal to your life. I want to invite now Robin to, I want to take her up on what she volunteered to do here for all of us today. And that is for her to reflect on someone that she put in her chart, on her page there. And she's going to respond to this card. This is one of my life legacy cards, and she has a story to tell you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so I wanted to share about my mother for a couple of reasons. One is I'm 57 this year, and my mom was 57 when she passed. And it was also the year that I had my firstborn, PJ. And as a woman today, there's so much that I never got the opportunity to ask her. Because as you know, many of you have children, and I know that your young adults are self-centered, right? They're focused on building a career or, having children, getting married, all of those things. And so the questions and the conversations I would love to have with her today, I can't have, and I would have really loved to, had something written from her that really shared, as a woman growing up in a poor Irish Catholic family. She had two brothers and a sister, and what that life was like for her. One thing that she did share that did have a huge impact on my life was that both of her brothers got to go to college, and she never had that opportunity, neither did her sister, and she really got to experience the impact of that on their lives and watched her brothers, do very well financially and felt somewhat disempowered, I think, financially in her own life. And so when it came time for me to go to college, I was sort of young and dumb, if you will, and didn't see the importance. And she filled out my college application. And that, will forever be grateful to her for that opportunity. I think there's that gap, right, between you just never expect not to have your parents around, and having something, sharing something with the next generation when you can, and even if you don't think they value it, they will.
Thank you, Robin, very much. And certainly what I heard in that story is that one of the values that she had was education. I mean, that was just top of her list. And she was determined that she was going to give that to you.
And independence, right? Because education means independence.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you very much. And I hope that helps just to, that this story helps reinforce the idea that those who have come before us, whether they're alive now or not, are important influences on us in so many ways. And we are the carriers of of legacy, as well as creators of them. So I want to keep talking about this idea of legacy, and to, before we get into into this idea of a legacy letter, because I want to put this idea of legacy now in the context of estate and financial planning. And this is obviously something that's really important to Robin. It's clear that she takes into account both the tangible wealth that you've built and want to continue to build, as well as the intangible nature of the wealth that you have. That's important for her to understand what that is, and for you to continue to build that as alongside your tangible assets. And this just really fits in with my view of excuse me, I'm just trying to get up the slide again, with my view of what estate and financial planning is really all about. Ultimately, it has everything to do with legacy. And that when you think about legacy, especially in light of estate and financial planning, it forces this question, which I think is a really interesting one for you to ask yourself, which is, well, what do you have to give? And not only to give to your family, but to give to the world. And what do you have to give in the largest sense of the word? And to think about legacy as the lasting influence of the gifts that you give, I think is another really interesting definition of legacy, that it's the lasting influence of the gifts that you give. And look at the gifts you have to give. So of course you have financial assets, which you hope, I know you hope will continue to grow. But look at what else you have to give. And this is true in your life and afterwards. So let's think about it in that context. You have relationships, values, history and stories. You have wisdom and perspective. And another gift that's very important is clarity. The clarity of your intentions and the clarity of your feelings. And these are all things that you can be giving with the time that you have still in your life. And when you think about a legacy letter is one of the ways that you can communicate some of that intangible wealth that's on the right side of the column. And when you think about with intention, how to transmit both the tangible wealth that's going to be in your estate plan and the intangible wealth that's embedded in your relationships, your values, the history, the heritage that you're a carrier of, the stories of your life, the wisdom and perspective, and the clarity of what you want and the clarity of your feelings. When you put all that together, haven't you pretty much covered all the aspects of what's important to you and all the things that you want to give? So that's the context for me of the legacy letter, is it enables you to support what you're already doing in your life in terms of transmitting that intangible wealth with everything that you're doing and talking about. So the legacy letter is the opportunity to really put down in paper in a tangible way some of the most important aspects of what you consider your intangible wealth. So that's the context now for thinking about, now for introducing what is this thing called the legacy letter? What do they look like? What do they sound like? How would I do this? So this is a time now to just take a break. Is there anything, Robin, that you would want to add to that kind of preliminary giving of context to the idea of the legacy letter? Anything you want to add? Or are there any questions that have come in?
So we can give it a second for questions. There'll
be another opportunity, but that's the end of a kind of an introduction to give a frame to this idea.
I don't think at this point there are any questions, so we can.
Great. Okay, let's move on then. All right. Okay, so if you've never heard of the term ethical will, this is where I give you a history about them. I never had either till around was about 15 years ago now. I was working as a freelance writer. I was a journalist, and I was always amazed at what people would tell me, simply because I asked them a question, then I listened. And I just had the experience over and over again of how people really like the opportunity to reflect on their lives and share what's most important to them. And most people think to themselves, well, I guess I have to write an autobiography if I'm going to do that. If I'm going to put down some of these things on paper, how do I do that? I guess I write an autobiography. And when I read about the idea of an ethical will or a legacy letter, I thought, oh, it's so beautiful. Anyone can do that. You don't need to write an autobiography. Anyone can write a letter. And I thought it was just a very beautiful, simple idea that everybody ought to know about. And what I learned when I did the research about it was I learned that the term ethical will and the idea of creating a letter like that with intention as something that you did as part of the gifts you gave, part of the inheritance you passed on to other people. That idea actually comes out of the Jewish tradition. When about 800 years ago, you see now that there was an expectation that fathers would write to their sons what it would mean to live a worthy or ethical life. And these old documents are really interesting to read. So this is an excerpt from a document that was written, quite a long letter in this case. A man's writing to his son, and in this section he's talking about money. And he said to his son, there's an olden proverb, go to bed without supper and rise without debt. And Robin, I want to know if you've ever given anyone that advice. Without supper and rise without debt. And then he goes on to say, defile not the honor of thy countenance by borrowing. May thy creator save thee from that habit. And so 800 years ago, he's telling his son not to get credit cards. So what I loved about this was I love the idea of intentionality. This is just something at the time when this took hold in the Jewish tradition, that this was an expectation that fathers just did this. This was part of the inheritance that they gave. And I love the intentionality of that. And that was what attracted me to them. But these letters are very prescriptive. I mean, they are rule from beyond the grave. Dad said this, so you need to do this. And I found them very beautiful, regardless of that tone, which we no longer, that's not really how we communicate. It's not how we don't want to lecture our children. Our children don't want to be lectured. But I loved the fact that I could still hear his voice. He's still saying to me, and all these old folks that I read, they're all still saying to me, you know, I was here too. I'm not that different than you. And maybe there's something that I can teach you. Maybe, and there are things that they taught me, showed me, proved to me. And I just thought they were very beautiful. So I kind of shifted my writing and thought, you know, I want to, you know, become an expert in this. And I ghost wrote a whole lot of them and then wrote a guidebook and started doing presentations. And that's why you find me right here. So what I want to do now is to just share with you now with what some contemporary ethical wills sound like, so that you can have a sense of what their format is and what some of the topics are. And I'm going to go now to share the screen again because I want you to be able to see these as I read some of these. These are, for the most part, excerpts of letters that I help people create. And they have given me permission to be able to share these. So this first example is when you talk about a gift, and the legacy letter is being a part of the way that, I mean, you know, a gift of yourself and part of the ways that you are sharing yourself with those that are coming up behind you. This is an example of a gift of a mother who wants to continue being a mother. And who doesn't want to continue being a mother as a mother, right? So this woman wrote a 2-page document. This was something that she intended to share with her children after she wrote it. I don't know whether she ultimately did or not, but that was her intention, was that she share it soon after she wrote it, and that it would be a work in progress that she would add to as they got older, and she got older. But she said to them, the most important thing I can bequeath you is something I hope I've already given you, a deep conviction of your own worth that translates into standards and instincts that will serve you all your life. And then she wrote a list. So she had a couple introductory paragraphs, and then she had a list, and in each one of these bullets, there were a couple of lines to each one of the bullets, but here's the beginning of 3 of the bullets. And she wanted to just share things that she hoped that they would do or remember or think about. And these are 3 of them. So she says, I hope each of you will stay connected to each other. Commit yourself to things. It's where the rewards are. Seek out those who are older and more experienced. So that's an example of a 2-page ethical will where she's trying to pass on her wishes for them, essentially, her hopes for them, and a little bit of advice along the way. And she did it in the form mostly of a list. This next example was written by a couple, and they had just created an estate plan that was very complicated. And their children, there were some trusts that were set up, and their children were in their late 20s, and they were going to begin to get some distributions from the trust. And this couple was very philanthropic. They had very different experiences with money as when they were growing up. And they didn't want their children to just kind of get money plunked in their laps. They really wanted this money to be seen in the context of their values and the context of their own stories about money. So they created, this is a document that's about 8 pages long. They had the opportunity to really think out loud about what they really wanted to express to their children. Their not only how the estate plan was set up, and that was one of the functions, was that they were going to explain in plain English what the estate plan looked like. But then they really wanted to share some of their own histories about money, their values about money, their hopes for what they thought the money would enable in the lives of their children. And they really wanted to talk about their values about philanthropy. That was one of the main purposes. So what they write to their children is, the legal and financial documents may imply our values, but they do not provide a clear explanation of our motivations or a sense of the path we've taken to get to this point. We love you both unconditionally, and we want you to have a complete picture of our thinking and an explanation of the plans we have made. The most important matter is not how you got your money or how you're going to spend it. It's how you're going to be spending your lives and what kind of people you're going to be. And their intention was that this be something that was a conversation that they wanted to have initiated by this letter. So they shared the letter with their children, and then they sat down to talk to them about it. So it's an example of how a letter that starts off as a monologue turned into a dialogue. And that's a very beautiful example of how that's possible to do. This is another example of an ethical will. That's a list. Now, this was a man who was in a workshop, and the exercise was to write down 15 things that you knew to be true. And this is a fun and easy way to kind of create a wisdom exercise for yourself. So these are 15 things that of the 15, I picked out 5. And he said, you need to kick off the sheets. Busy is good. No one has a lock on a way to do something. There's value somewhere in everyone. A joke is almost always in order. And what I love about this example is it's punchy, it's short, and it is completely reflective of this man's personality, which is one of the things that's absolutely true about a legacy letter. Is it better sound like you, it better be authentic to you, or it won't have nearly the power that it would otherwise. So you don't have to feel as though you have to create something that's the most profound thing that somebody ever wrote. This needs to reflect you and be authentically you. And it doesn't have to be long. This was 1 page. So that's, I think, a really good example. And lists can be a really wonderful way to do this. So because there's no such thing as a standard ethical will, because they're unique to their authors, think about what would be easy and fun and interesting for you to write and helpful. So there's a person that I know who created a list of movies and said, these are my favorite movies. If you watch these movies, you'll understand me. Another person that I know created a list of his favorite songs and said, and then a little explanation about what was happening in his life at the time of the songs and why those songs meant so much to him. Those are variations on lists, and I think they are beautiful. This is another example of a man who wanted to this is a person who traveled a lot, and he was a little afraid that there might be a business trip that he might not make it home from. And he wanted to leave a bit of his wisdom to help support his wife, who might be needing to raise the 3 children on her own. And so he wrote sort of a series of reflections on a number of topics that were kind of things that he learned in his life. And he wrote this one about ebbs and flows. He said, it was from my 9th grade science teacher that I first learned the concept of ebbs and flows. He drew diagrams of cycles on the board, showing naturally occurring ups and downs. I see this in all areas of life, in biology, in business, in friendships, marriages, and in society. Everything has its ebbs and flows. And sometimes when things are not quite as I'd like them to be, it's reassuring to remember this idea and not to jump in and force things to change. And what I love about that example is that this is, I have to go back up and say, I'm happy to say that the man is still alive. His children, he wrote this when his children were like middle schoolers. They're now in their the early to mid 20s, and he has shared this letter with his children with the idea that, and sort of a backdrop about why he did it, with the intention that as they got older, he might add to it. But what I love about this is that that's a bit of advice that's wrapped up in a story. And wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to get as a young adult? The idea that, things have flows and things have ebbs. And if things look bad, don't worry, things are going to turn around. And this is a man who probably from the point of view of his children, it looked like their father's life was probably all flow, sorry. It may look like he had never had any low spots. And so the opportunity for him to say, I have, and you will too. I want just a couple of other examples that I just sort of want to lead, but I want to give kind of a review now of what these are before I do that. So As you've seen, ethical wills don't have to be long. And the average, average ethical will or legacy letter is between 1 and 10 pages. There's some that are longer, but they do not have to be long. In fact, one of the questions you need to ask yourself is, well, what would be the tolerance of my audience for this? How long would they expect a letter to be like this? And most people don't think that a 30-page letter is kind of appropriate for a letter. So what would feel appropriate for you for a length? That's an important question to ask yourself. I also want to stress that these legacy letters are not binding. And so if you are going to talk in your legacy letter about an aspect of your estate plan, like that couple did that I read, it's a good idea to share that with your attorney, just so that there is nothing in it that might cause any confusion. So in a court of law, a legacy letter is not going to hold water. The legal will hold water. That's what's legally binding. But that doesn't mean that what you put into your legacy letter might not cause confusion, and you wouldn't want to cause confusion. So you have to be really careful with what you say. You can imagine what an unethical ethical will would look like, couldn't you? It would be controlling, it would be critical, it would try to rule from beyond the grave. This is not the idea of a contemporary ethical will or legacy letter. A contemporary legacy letter is a gift of yourself. It's intended to be helpful. It's intended to be something that not to have someone wonder what the intent was of it. It's not intended to be controlling. It's intended to be loving and helpful. So it's really important that you can be honest with yourself about what is your intention. Why do you want to do this? And make sure that everything that's in there is flowing toward a good intention. You heard some examples written by both men and women individually, also by couples. It can be a powerful process for couples to sit down and think, what do I want to say? What do you want to say? What do we want to say together? And actually the process of doing that together can be really powerful. You also saw some, the list of punchy things, the 15 things I know to be true. That man wrote that in handwriting, and he intended to keep it in handwriting. He intended to clip it to the legal documents. And so it could be in handwriting. It also could be typed. One thing that I always say to people when they ask me about this difference between should it be handwritten or should it be typed, is that if these intend to live a long time into the future, and read by perhaps people that never knew you, you might want to create a typed version if you've written a handwritten version, simply because who knows who's going to be able to read handwriting in the future. I mean, they're not teaching script in school anymore. And so I think to have a typed version as well is really helpful. That's also true if you choose to create a video version of your thoughts and your reflections, your intentions, or an audio version. And a lot of people like to do that, to use a multimedia form, which is fine, which is great. But if you do that, have a transcript available, because who knows what's going to be, who knows how you're going to access digital media in the future. We all know that we can't watch our VHS tapes, videotapes anymore. And so, technology unfortunately ages. So I hope paper doesn't age. I would just urge you to, put it in a transcript form as well. And where should you keep this? Well, it would be terrible if you created a legacy letter and nobody ever found it. So it's important that you indicate where it is. You either attach it to your other documents, or you put a note saying, this is where it can be found. And however you write it, and one of the things that I emphasize to people all the time is that these are works in progress. Because if you ever thought you needed to be old, you needed to be as old as you were ever going to be, or as wise as you were ever going to be to create a letter like this, you probably never do it, because I think everyone feels as though maybe next year they'll get it together. Maybe then they would know what they want to talk about, or they would be able to be profound or wise, or whatever expectations you would have for yourself on this. And I just stress to people, don't wait. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. It's never too early to write a legacy letter, but one day it will be too late. So start with something small, get started with something that is easy to say, and then add to it as time goes on and inspiration and time allow. But make sure whatever you've written, that you've dated it, you've signed it, and that people know where to find it. I also want to say, you know, my ethical will is a collection of writing. It's not just one letter. And so I have a collection that's in a file, and I add to it, you know, myself, as I said, as time and inspiration allow. Right now, I'm writing a letter to my grandchildren, each one of them on their birthdays, so that there'll be a collection of writing for them that I want them to get if I'm still around when they're 18, if not at the point, regardless of whether I'm still around, for them to receive when they're 18. So the sky's the limit on this. There's no such thing as a standard ethical will. Now, I just want to share with you a couple of more examples that, to me, prove what I think is the essence of a legacy letter, and that is opportunity to express gratitude and love, which is really what your audience is probably most going to want to hear from you, that they matter to you. And this first excerpt, I think this is a very interesting story. This was written by a woman who, when her son was 3, she wrote him a legacy letter. He's now in his early 30s and he's married. And she pulled out the old document and she said, you know, I really want to add to this. This is really interesting what I wrote back when he was 3. He's now a grown man. I want him to have what I wrote him at 3, but I also really want to express my feelings about him now that he's older. And I want to credit him for the kind of person that he's become. And so she added to what she'd written to him when she was 3 and he was 3. And one of the things she said was this: "You're a wonderful young man with ideas of your own that we have great respect for. You know us well enough that you'd probably be able to identify most of the things that are important to us. Even so, the idea of leaving an ethical counterpart to the estate plan is something we think is really important to do, since we've centered our family life on the values and not the assets." And one of the things that she added toward the end was this. She said, "I share these things not with the expectation that you have to follow them, but because I want you to know what my experience has taught me and how I feel and see the world." And that, to me, is the essence of a contemporary ethical will or legacy letter. It's the opportunity to share what your experience has taught you and how you see and feel, and how you feel and see the world. It is not up to you to decide how someone's going to take this in. You don't know how people are going to take this letter of yours in, and they're going to read it in different ways and at different times of your life. But this is a gift of you for them to take themselves as they will at the time that they read it. Now, there's a very beautiful book called The 4 Things That Matter Most, and it's written by a physician who works with people at the end of their lives. And he said that the 4 most important things that people need to either say or hear at the end of their lives are one or more of these 4 things. And this is what they are: thank you, I love you, forgive me, I forgive you. And I think that anyone can find one of those 4 things to easily express in their letter. And that, to me, is one of the starting places for creating your legacy letter, is to respond to one of those 4 things. And in this particular case, as you can imagine, this man needed to say, forgive me. And I worked with this man briefly, and you can see exactly how he feels. I know I wasn't always the best father. And he went on to use his letter to essentially apologize to them. And I don't know whether he ultimately shared this letter with his daughters. I don't know whether he did, but I do know that the process of talking about it, writing about it, seeing his words down in paper was hugely therapeutic for him, the opportunity to say, forgive me. And even if he didn't share the letter with them, I know he was going to be saying things to them, doing things with them to make up for what he felt like he had done. So, or not done. So this last example was written by a mother, and she created, this is an excerpt from a 1-paragraph ethical will. And what she wanted to do was to say, thank you and I love you. And this is an excerpt from what is a long paragraph, but here it is. I hope I will live for a very long time to see you well into adulthood and to share your future with you. There's much to look forward to, and I hope I will be part of all the adventures and challenges and joys. But in the event I am not, the most important thing you need to know is how much my love for you created the person that you will remember as me. I made you quite literally in my womb, but you made me too. So the opportunity to say thank you, the opportunity to say I love you, those are messages that are timeless. And those are messages that will continue to support your loved ones forever. So I urge you to think about that being a place to start. I do want to shift now to helping you think now about, okay, how would you do this? I want to give you some structure in addition to those admonitions of saying, thank you and I love you never goes out of style. But I want to give you now a structure so that you can feel successful at starting a letter that doesn't in the beginning have to be any more than one to 2 pages, and certainly might be able to stand on its own in 1 to 2 pages. And before I do that, though, I just want to check in with you, Robin. Are there any questions, or do you have any comments about what I've talked about, the nuts and bolts of what one of these legacy letters are?
So I haven't seen any questions come up. Wow, I wonder if that's my, okay. I haven't seen any questions come up, but I did have a question just in terms of writing these and marinating on them a bit.
Yes.
And in your own personal experience, have you, you said you have a collection. Have you ever pulled one?
Have I ever what?
Taken one out and been like, it really didn't fit. Wasn't really my intent. The way I was feeling in that moment really doesn't serve the audience. I don't know if you could speak to that.
That's a really interesting question. Yes, the answer is yes. You have to think about these as works in progress because you're a work in progress and your audience is a work in progress. And I shared that example of the woman who sort of built on her own letter, she kept most of what she'd written in there when he was 3, because it was beautiful what she said to him when he was 3. And so I think when you throw it out, if you discard it, be thoughtful about what you discard, because to someone else's eyes, it still might feel valid. But it has to, in the end, feel as though this is something that you really want to have be a permanent record of what you want to say. So that process of time and having time be your ally with this, and having the opportunity to go back and look at what you wrote and then consider what things you want to add or change is really valuable. But my main message is don't wait. Don't wait until you feel as though, well, I would know exactly what I would want to say and I would never want to change it. I mean, that may never happen, that you get to that point. So don't wait. You just never know what will happen tomorrow.
Right. Yes, and you probably don't want to be drafting something like this if you're, sick or unable, right? I mean, that's a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I know from experience that my own experience and the experience of so many people that I've talked to and worked with is that it's our human nature to say, I really like this idea. This is a really good idea. But maybe especially for my mother, I'll tell her to do this. I'm not quite ready to do it. Or my neighbor down the street, he's had a really interesting life and he should do this. But me, well, maybe I'll wait a little while because I don't know if I'm ready. And there might be other voices that come into your head like, maybe people really wouldn't be interested in this. I certainly don't want to come across like I know more than they do, or I'm trying to tell them what to do, or I'm trying to write a lecture to them. And and gee, I'm getting started on this. I don't like how I sound. This has got to be profound. I can never be profound. I'm not I'm not a very good writer. What if I go to all this trouble and nobody really is interested? And those are all really, really common reactions to thinking about this idea. And I just want to warn all of you that when you sit down to do this, some of those voices may be shouting in your ear. And so what I say to people is, okay, just put yourself in the shoes of, let's say, your grandfather. Would you have wanted your grandfather to have said, well, I don't think anyone would really be interested in this. I don't think they would care how I feel about them. I don't think they'd be very interested in the things I've learned in my life. I don't feel like I'm a very good writer, so I don't think I should put anything down at all. I mean, you'd be shouting at him, don't make that choice for me. Do it. I don't care if it's not profound. I don't care if it doesn't say everything, but put something down. And so put yourself in the shoes of the people who'd be getting it. They would never want you to make that choice for them. So take the weight off of it. It does have a heavy weight. I mean, it does. I acknowledge that. The idea that you'd be creating something that's going to live beyond you, that feels kind of heavy. And so try to start with something that doesn't feel heavy to you, that feels really beautiful to you, that would be really not easy necessarily, because it can be very emotional to do, but something that feels very satisfying to do. And then allow yourself the permission to add to it or change it in the future if you wish. So, but don't let the voices shout you down. Yeah. So I have written a guidebook about how to create an ethical will. And at the end, I'll show you a slide, and you would have the opportunity to buy it on my website if you wish. And that in that guidebook, you're given kind of a whole lot of ideas for things you could talk about, and then a process to sort of narrow down what those things might be to help you choose a focus. But for today, what I want to do is to give you a structure for something that is just a 1 to 2 page document, and sort of a very shortened version of what is in the guidebook. And this is what it would look like. I will tell you that if you do nothing more than share your gratitude, share a bit of wisdom, and bless your recipients, you will create something in a very short space that will mean a great deal to your audience and will feel very satisfying to write. And these are the questions that you could ask yourself. And I have to say that one of the handouts that you got has this on it. Something similar to this, so that there's something that you can take home with you and follow. But these are the questions, and the opportunity to express gratitude. What have they given you? How have they enriched your life? And then to share a little bit of wisdom. What are just 3 things? Take that list format, but only pick 3 things. What are 3 things that your life has taught you that you know to be true? Share those things. And then to bless them. What are your hopes for them? What is the one most important thing you want to say to them? And if you can cover just those 3 things, gratitude, wisdom, and blessing, and do that in a short space, what a gift you have created. I also want to propose a legacy letter that this is another thing that might appeal to some of you, to do this either in addition to the shorter letter or in place of it. And if this feels relevant to you because of the work that you're doing with Robin, then maybe this is something that would appeal to you. To write a letter with the intention of putting the financial assets that they're going to be receiving in a context, in the context of your values, to be able to first share the story. What is the story behind the assets? What are the reasons they exist? There's the story there. What built them? What were the values that built them? Where do they come from? And then to express your values about the money. What have you learned about money? What it can do, what it can't do. What is your definition of success? And then again, just like in the other letter, bless the recipients. What are your hopes for them, and what is the most important thing that you want for them? And perhaps to add, what is it that what would you hope that the impact of the money could be in their lives? So that might appeal to you as another kind of a focus to take with your legacy letter. I want to, and I should just also say and I'll show you these at the end. So you'll see the slides where the handouts there that I've given to you, I hope will help you to be able to craft one of those letters easily. And actually, let me go back to the slide, because there's one thing that I realized I wanted to say here that I haven't said. So, in just to, reflect back on that idea of blessing your loved ones, and that being the thing that is common to both of those letters and that type of letter, and which I think is the most important thing for the recipients to hear from you. I wanted to share this quote, which I came across just a couple of days ago, actually. And this man wrote this: "If the first 2 decades of the 21st century have taught us anything, it's that uncertainty is chronic, instability is permanent, disruption is common, and we can neither predict nor govern events. There will be no new normal. There will only be a continuous series of not normal episodes, defying prediction and unforeseen by most of us until they happen." So when I first read that quote, I thought, oh my gosh, that is so bleak. But then I thought, it's probably always been that way. It just feels to us as though there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And when I applied it back to the idea of a legacy letter, I thought, what actually moves me about this quote is that it reminds me that we have a responsibility to help the people who are coming up behind us, our children, our grandchildren, whoever we identify as being important to us. We have a responsibility to them to give them the best foundation that we can to face a very uncertain future. And that one of the greatest gifts that we can give them is to bless them, and to be able to say, I have faith in you, I love you, and I'm proud of you. I heard a story just yesterday about a man who has a note from his father, a handwritten note from his father, and it says, "I am proud of you, son." And this means so much to him. His father is long passed, that he has that taped to his computer. "I am so proud of you, son." That is part of the foundation that he takes forward into a future that is uncertain. And so when I think about the power of a legacy letter, I think that is what we are giving people. We are giving them, we are trying to give them the most solid foundation we can to go forward into a future that we can't predict and that they can't predict. And those letters and those expressions of love and faith and gratitude are a powerful part of that foundation. So a few more slides here. And that is so when you think about this letter, what are the steps you need to take? Well, the first thing you need to do is to be specific. Who do you want to write it to? And they can be written to, your letter could be written to one person. It could be written to a group of people. It could be it could be kind of a theme and variations where there's a common core and then there's individual messages to different people. You could write this to your children. You could write it to your grandchildren. You could write it to your spouse. You could write it to your parents. You could write it to your friends. So choosing your audience is your first task. Who is this going to be for? And so name them. And these are not usually letters that are written to the general public. They're written usually to specific people. So name them, first of all. And then think to yourself, what kind of an experience do you want to create for them when they're reading this? How do you want them to feel when they read your words? And that's a very powerful place to put yourself. How do you want them to feel? That may kind of change the whole tone you take with this when you think about how do you want them to take it in. And as part of that is to be honest with yourself, to ask yourself, what is your primary intention? What are your motivations? and to check yourself at the door and make sure that control is not one of your motivations. Your motivations should be the sincere desire to express love and express things that you truly believe are going to be helpful, and that you're giving this gift of yourself as something for them to touch when they need to hear your voice once again. As we wrap up here, I want you to go back to this exercise here with the influence page. And I want you to just take a minute to write down some names under the line. And the names here, the instruction is to write down the names of people in whose lives you hope that you can be a positive influence. These might be people that you decide to write your legacy letter to. They might not be, there might be other names other than that. But take a minute to write down a few names under the line. And now what I want you to do is to answer this prompt, to list 3 adjectives that you hope others will use when they think of you. What are some of the ways you'd like other people to remember you? What do you want them to remember you for? Can you write down some adjectives or some values that you would like attached to you? Think of just 3 of them and put them inside the circle next to your name. Okay. Well, I hope that's kind of completed the legacy circle for you, to think of yourself as both a carrier of influence, the influence of others, and the creator of legacy in the lives of other people. You should feel free to go back to that exercise anytime you want to, maybe add some names both on the top and the bottom of that chart. We're just about to finish up here. I just want to share with you I just want to point again, the handouts that I've given to you. In addition to that circular handout, you'll see that there's a structure here for that 3-part universal ethical will or legacy letter, the opportunity to say thank you, 3 things I've learned I know to be true, and the one most important thing that you want them to know. And in addition to that, to help you think about the 3 things you've learned or you know to be true, there's a list here of just some topics to help you reflect on some of those things that you have learned, the lessons you have learned, the things you know to be true. And that's a similar thing to what you'll find in the guidebook. And here is a picture of the guidebook. It's about 28 pages. It's kind of a workbook style brainstorming tool. You don't write the letter in the guidebook, but you use this as a brainstorming tool to take notes for yourself and respond to some questions and prompts. And then there's a shot here of all 12 of the life legacy cards. And if you are interested in these tools, you can receive 20% off of them if you order them through the website through April 12th. And just put in the coupon code of Northstar and you'll get that discount. No obligation here at all, however. And in the end, this is the final word I want to leave you with, is that the words that come from your heart will enter the hearts of all those who receive your beautiful, beautiful legacy letter. And I want to thank you very much for your interest and your attention, and open it up now to any comments or questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Susan. Those were really beautiful stories and very impactful. So I'm excited to have some additional conversations with our clients using these tools. So I'm going to give it a few minutes, but I will stop the recording while we take some questions if there any exist.